Hello everyone, my name is Lily Pierce. I'm 26 years old. I'm a lay servant in the United Methodist Church. I graduated from UNCG with a bachelor's degree in English. And what else should I mention? Oh yes, I have Friedreich's Ataxia, which is a genetic neuromuscular progressive disorder. So you may have already noticed that it affects my speech somewhat and my hand-eye coordination. So if you're thinking, is this chick on drugs? No, I'm just handicapped. I want to apologize before I get started because I did have a microphone to use, but my FA fingers can't get the little clip to attach to my shirt. So, I've been wanting to film this video for a few days, and I'm not willing to wait any longer, so we'll just have to do without the microphone this time, and maybe next time. I'm sorry that I'm struggling to look at the camera. I haven't done this very many times, so I'll do my best. Without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it. But I'll just say also that I have one video on this channel so far. It's a sermon that I gave at my church about, what was it? Jeremiah 29:11, and talking about seeking God and seeking justice. So, this is my second video, and I had wanted to maybe rework some old sermons from the past and convert that into videos, but I keep having new ideas. So we'll see if I'm gonna get around to the old ones or if I'm just gonna have too many new ones. I don't know about you guys, but at my church we haven't had Sunday school in about 3 or 4 months, and so I thought maybe it'd be interesting to start making some Bible study-esque videos. And, well, to be honest, I didn't even think of this really. I was praying to God that He would guide me with this channel, and then when I was reading the scripture after praying, I came across the story of the prodigal son, and when I read it, it was like God was saying, knock, knock, you need to open a Google Doc right now and just start going. So that's what I did. I practiced a few times, and now I'm here, ready to give it to you. Today, we are going to be talking about humility versus self-righteousness in the prodigal son. Well, by the way, I'll also say that I grew up in church, and I speak a lot, and I read a lot about it, and I tend to have what you might call a Christianese accent to my language. I say things that maybe wouldn't make any kind of sense to someone who's not a Christian. So I may not always remember to clarify myself, but I will try to make it a little more palatable for someone who isn't a lifelong churchgoer. The prodigal son is a classic beloved parable. It's a classic and beloved parable because it's a story about undeserved mercy. And don't we all want to have mercy and second chances and forgiveness, even if it seems like we don't deserve it? And for those who don't know, a parable is a story that Jesus told in order to make a point or make more than one point. A very, very condensed version of the story, which can be found in Luke 15, is that there was a father with 2 sons, and the father had a lot of money, and he had some money that he was going to give each son when he passed away, but the younger son, let me make sure, yes, the younger son, he wanted to get his inheritance early, So he asked his father to give it to him, and he ran away from home, and he squanders all the money in hard living, and he finds himself destitute, and he ends up working for someone feeding their pigs, and he's thinking to himself that he's so hungry that he would be willing to eat the food that the pigs are eating right now. At that point, he thinks to himself, you know, my father has people who work for him, and they're not starving to death. So what if I went home and I told my father, I know after all I've done, I'm not worthy to be your son anymore, but what if you could just hire me as a worker and I'll have enough to eat that way? He's traveling home, he's rehearsing all of this in his head, but as he approaches his home, his father sees him from afar, and he is just overcome with joy and gladness, and he runs up to the son and welcomes him home, and he goes back to the house, and he has the servants throw a big party for the son. And meanwhile, the older son, who had always been loyal and never left home and did what the younger son did, he was angry, he was jealous, and he wouldn't come inside the house and join the celebration. So the father walks outside and tries to reason with him. And the older son is saying, listen, I've been working for you like a slave for all these years, and I've never disobeyed you. And you haven't thrown a big party for me, but you're throwing a big party for this guy after all that he's done when he comes home. And the father basically says, look, son, all I have is yours, but we've got to celebrate the fact that your brother who was dead is now alive. He was lost and now he's found. There are a few different approaches to this story, and I sort of joke that if Jesus had been alive in the days of university and if he had attended one, he would have been an English major. And the reason I say that is because I think that parables are like written works of art, because they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a parable kind of paints a picture with words, and there's different lessons and takeaways in parables, so I think that's really cool. I have watched a few videos on YouTube lately about New Age Christianity, so I want to throw out there, this is not a New Age dog whistle where I'm saying that we should just take stories from the Bible and make them so allegorical that they can mean anything we want them to. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that there might be more than one takeaway to a story. There's so many extremes, and I feel like I'm trying to walk this balance between like super conservative evangelical-esque Constantinian Christianity, as coined by the YouTuber Damon Garcia, versus this New Age Christianity. Because I feel like it's two extremes and I'm not either one. But I'll digress. The most obvious takeaway from the story of the prodigal son is that God gives us undeserved mercy. God is a God of steadfast love and grace, and in the story, the son didn't deserve to be welcomed home, he didn't deserve to be celebrated, he didn't deserve anything, but he got so much more than he deserved, and that's a very hopeful and positive message for us, that God is also willing to extend that kind of grace to us, in spite of all of our pettiness and our selfishness and our sinfulness and all that good stuff that makes us human. A less obvious takeaway that I've still heard some people talk about is that for us Christians, when we hear this story, we often put ourselves in the shoes of the loyal son, and we look at non-believers or new Christians as the prodigal son coming home. And we think we're like the loyal son who has always been there, and we need to be welcoming of the prodigal son coming home. But in this less obvious takeaway, we see that actually every single one of us is the prodigal son, because even if we are Christians, even if we are very devout, we have all fallen short of the glory of God, as Paul says in one of his letters. And none of us really deserve God's mercy. None of us is the loyal son. But again, we all can have access to that grace because God is so good. And actually, this reminds me of a quote from a Relient K song that I'll never forget. And the quote says, "The beauty of grace is that it makes life not fair." Those two takeaways I just gave you are two semi-common ones. But when I read this story again, before making this video, before writing the script for this video, I noticed a different takeaway. And what I noticed is the difference in the postures of the two sons. Despite what he's done wrong, the prodigal son represents a posture of humility, and the loyal son, despite his loyalty, he represents a posture of self-righteousness. Let's contrast what the two sons say so that we can understand the point I'm trying to make here. We look at the words of the prodigal son, and he says, "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." That's very humble to say, "I'm not worthy." And then contrast that with what the loyal son says. He starts off his tirade with a command, kind of audacious. "Listen," with an exclamation mark. "I have worked for you like a slave all these years." This is one of those instances, I think, where what someone doesn't say is as telling as what they do say. And what the loyal son doesn't say, "Dad, I really love you and I respect you and I've worked so hard all these years to make you proud and keep up our family." He doesn't seem to have any kind of emotions caught up in it. It's just all based on his works. "Look at what I've done. Look at what I've done." And it was like he was talking to a boss instead of talking to his own father. And this makes me think of a very, very crucial concept in Christianity that is deserving of its own video at some point in the future, but it's the concept of saved by grace versus saved by works. Paul discusses this conflict quite a lot, and if you don't know, Paul wrote most of the New Testament in the form of letters to different churches, and he discusses this issue, especially in his letter to the church in Rome, the book of Romans. We don't earn our salvation. We're not given a checklist of things to do, and then if we do 7 out of 10 of them, we pass the test and we get to go to heaven. That is just such a horrible misunderstanding of what the faith is about. But I understand why people think that, because there's so many legalistic Christians out there. I don't even want to go into that topic right now, but just look it up if you're curious. So, anyway, we can't earn salvation. We just need to accept the free gift of grace that is offered to us by God through Jesus Christ. And since none of us can earn our salvation, we're all on the same plane. Nobody is superior to anyone else. We are all at God's mercy. and thank God that He gives it to us. The older son, the loyal son speech. It reminds me of saved by grace versus saved by works, and it also reminds me of the contrast throughout the Gospels between the normal average citizens who are seeking Jesus for spiritual and physical healing versus the religious elites, such as the Pharisees and the scribes and the lawyers. With the elites, what they were mostly trying to do was get Jesus to contradict himself or trick him into blaspheming, trying to back him into a corner. Whereas the average citizens, they just wanted his mercy poured on them. And time again throughout the Gospels, Jesus is moved with compassion to help the average citizens who are just coming to him for healing and forgiveness. And on the other hand, he is condemning the religious elites for their arrogance and their ulterior motives. It's funny that right before I filmed this video, I was reading in my Bible, and just in the next chapter, Luke 16, there's this little section where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, and he says, "You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your heart." Important to note about the society that Jesus came into, they lived in a theocracy, which means that the state religion and the government and the laws are all intertwined with each other. So, these religious elites that Jesus keeps butting heads with, they have a very privileged position in society. Their ulterior motives are related to materialistic things, prestige and power and wealth. And even in that little section I just incidentally came across and read to you, he's talking about how you may feel like you're really powerful in society, but God ultimately is the judge. For the loyal son, he reminds me of the Pharisees in some ways, because he seems to have ulterior motives as well. His ulterior motives, I think, are somewhat similar to those of the religious elites, because obviously his father has a good amount of money if he has workers and inheritances for his sons, and he is trying to bide his time and do what he needs to do so that he'll get everything his father has when his father passes away. Which is why, in the story, the son doesn't bring up love or respect for his father or anything like that. He's just talking about all that he's done. So it just kind of goes to show where his heart really lies. He's more focused on the things he's done than caring about his father. Throughout this video, I've been tying things together. I've been tying together the loyal son and the Pharisees, because in the dichotomy of the loyal son and the prodigal son, and also in the dichotomy of people who wanted healing versus the religious elites, in both of those, you see that one party is humble and the other is self-righteous. So that is the theme I am drawing out of this story today. Do I have a posture of humility when we approach God for mercy and for direction and for all those things? Or do we have a posture of self-righteousness? I just wanna bring a little bit of the modern day into it, and maybe it's time now to step on some toes, but then again, people who are super pharisaical tend to have very little self-awareness, so hey, maybe this won't offend anyone at all. who might be a person that we would see today that would kind of also embody that self-righteousness of the Pharisees and of the loyal son? Well, I think about people who are super devout, like they attend church, they attend retreats and conferences and things like that. They maybe read a lot of books, maybe they talk about it a lot or post about it on social media a lot. They have these sort of markers on the outside that show how devout they are. But on the inside, or when you actually have a conversation with them, they're very hateful, very judgmental, very self-righteous and superior. And they tend to scare people away more than welcome them in. A new takeaway from this parable for me, and hopefully for you, is that the loyal son and the Pharisees have in common a self-righteous attitude and ulterior motives. So to fully round out the connections I've drawn here, let's come back to the modern day Pharisees and loyal sons. We've seen that they have a self-righteous attitude, but what would I say are their ulterior motives, since the Pharisees and the loyal son have the motive of wealth? Well, it could be different in different situations. For a mega pastor of a big church, maybe those ulterior motives could be similar. But obviously we don't live in a theocracy anymore, and prestige and power is not really a good ulterior motive for why certain Christians are so arrogant and off-putting nowadays. So what is their ulterior motive? When I think of the kind of person who would approach some poor underpaid cashier and start antagonizing them about where they're going to go after they die, and if they don't get the answer they're looking for off the bat, they just go in a tirade about hell. What is it that motivates a person like that, I wonder? Well, as I've pondered it, this is kind of just my opinion. I think that it's a combination of buying into works salvation, back to the saved by grace versus saved by works thing, and also just good old-fashioned pride. Buying into works salvation, thinking that they need to prove their worthiness to God, and for some reason people think that harassing people and evangelizing to people in ways that are really doomed to fail from the start is somehow earning their worthiness in God's eyes. So the works salvation thing, and then also, like I said, good old-fashioned pride, just thinking, man, I'm glad I'm not like those disgusting, evil sinners and heathens over there. We're all sinners. We are all sinners. What would be the pure motive for serving God? If I'm talking about what might be ulterior motives, I think the pure motive for serving God that we are handed down in Scripture, it is just like what the loyal son should have felt for his father. Love. The loyal son should have been loyal to his father out of love, and we should serve God out of love. We are told in Scripture that the greatest commandments are 1, to love God, and 2, to love your neighbor. And the parable of the Good Samaritan reminds us that everyone is our neighbor. My opinion, you can't really do the first without the second. Because when you love God, when you are drawing nearer to God's heart and seeking His will, you will inevitably have your eyes and your heart and your mind opened to different issues and struggles and inequities and all kinds of things like that. And so again, I just don't believe that you can love God without loving your neighbor. It's like a cause and effect. I'm going to leave you off with all of these thoughts to ponder, and also a general sentiment that is reflected throughout so many parables in the Gospels, and that Jesus outright says multiple times, and that is this: the first will be last, and the last will be first. Bye, guys.